Hi, welcome to 320 Workshops. Today we have a project that is going to be very useful in demonstrating techniques on how to address some very common problems you run up against in furniture restoration.
These cross battens were added to the top to probably help strengthen it, but really added to the cracking in the top. We'll remove this strip along the front edge. We'll add this back later on. The tool I'm using is an old gasket scraper, but works really nice to pry things off like that. It's also used pretty nicely to open up the crack a little bit to get some glue squeezed down in there. We'll try and rub some of the glue down in there, and we'll move the boards around best we can to try and get the glue down into the crack. And then we'll clamp it up with a few clamps. We'll add one in the center here to kind of keep it flat. Once the glue's dried, we'll scrape off any squeeze out. There was squeeze out on both sides, so it did glue well. Next, we got to strengthen that crack because by itself it's not going to hold up. So we'll use some butterfly Dutchman, and we'll do a couple by hand, and then I'll do a couple with shaper origin. Here I'm just cutting out the shape. Now here's a trick. By using blue tape and then laying out the piece on top of the blue tape and using a knife to cut that out, I can see the lines much better than with a pencil, and the knife line will also help me later on. We'll remove some of the excess wood inside with a router, being very careful to come up close but not up to the edge. This could also be done by hand, but it's obviously a little more difficult to get the exact depth you want. Then using the chisel to cut the sides up to the line. This is where I was saying the knife line that I use to score the edge is helpful because I can feel that knife line with the end of the chisel. Then to help get everything flat in the bottom, I'm going to use this router plane to get around the edges to make sure it's flat. If it wasn't perfectly flat on the bottom, when I added the glue and put this in, it wouldn't make good contact and probably have not a strong glue joint. And we'll tap this into place. I'll put some clamps on it to hold it until the glue dries, and then sand it off any excess glue. The next couple I'll do with the shaper origin. Now you'll see the shape's a little bit different because I have the rounded corners, but using the workstation I can cut out the design. And what you do is basically use an outside cut on the insert, and then we'll go over to the top using the shaper plate. We'll line that up, use the same design, but now this time we'll do an inside cut. We'll put 3 in here, and obviously that's more than needed, but it kind of balanced it off, and being a top to a chest and adding that I think won't do any harm. And once those are dried, again clamp those till they dried, and then we sand them flat. Another piece was broken out. It was easier just to glue that back in, so that worked pretty well. Then we had some broken knots. The original had put in some wax filler or something, and honestly when we started to strip it, it almost was the color of bubble gum. It really was kind of hideous. Here I'm using some baking soda to help fill in that part that I carved out, and a little bit of CA glue. Now not too worried about the CA glue that's laying on top because there is still shellac on this top of this chest, so that's not absorbing in, and I'm just wiping off as best I can. That baking soda will now dry hard as a rock, and we'll fill in the rest with some black CA glue. This could also be done with epoxy, but the CA glue dries real quick and they're not very deep, so it worked pretty well. Another problem you run into is, especially with softwood like this, where those hinges were, it cracked all the way across. Probably opened a little too hard. So I'm going to add in a wooden patch. Well, this is going to be walnut. It's just a hardwood patch. And you can see here where I kind of kept it away from the edge so that when the lid's close, you won't see that patch. And then glue it in place. Again, this could be done by hand. This was done with the Shaper Origin, but you could do it the same way as I did the hand cut. But that's going to spread the load across. It's going to give those screws something nice to bite into, and it's going to prevent that crack across there from happening again. Now here's a little touch. Two of the boards were a little bit loose. The glue joint was broken. I couldn't really get it back together. So I was going to put just like a spline basically built in, same Dutchman style thing. But I thought it would make it a little bit nicer just to add a little something to it. So I put family on it because family is important to my friends who owns this top. And yes, I did make a mistake here. I put this patch in and I was looking at it from this side, but it was upside down to where it'll be with the door or the lid's open. And thank heavens I caught this before the glue started dry. I did get it in the clamps before I realized, but then it dawned on me what I had done. If it had happened, I would have just been able to do the same thing, make the patch again, cut it out again. I mean, I could have salvaged it, but luckily I caught it and was able to fix it before any problems. Another problem you run into is like a broken off screw. And I want to get this out because this might be where we put in a support for the lid. I'm using a specialized bit. It's basically like a 5/8 inch outer diameter tube with some saw teeth in it. Now it will walk around if you don't have some way to hold it. So that's what the little walnut board was, with a 5/16 inch hole in it. I was able to lay that over top of where the screw was and drill down into it. Then it kind of broke out a little piece. Got some needle nose pliers. These are called vampire pliers, and they actually are designed to do just this. And I was able to just back out that screw. I'm going to patch some of the larger cracks that had pieces missing with this Quickwood product. It's basically an epoxy putty, and you cut off the piece you want, and then you just mix it together, the two colors in it, until it's a uniform color. And unlike wood filler, this has, some epoxy to it, so it'll stick in place and stay there. So I'm squeezing it into any of the cracks that needed it, and there were a lot of places that weren't completely connected. Like I said, these cracks, a lot of the cracks were already glued together. The one by the hinges was, and I had some pieces missing from the other cracks, so we just filled in those missing pieces with this putty. And then of course sanding everything down till it's flat. The next task is to kind of bring these into match the others. I'm using some touch-up pins here. They didn't match exactly, but by putting that in and then sanding it off, I was able to get those to match pretty well. Another technique was to use a little bit of shellac and some pigments or dyes. I actually used some of the sanding dust from it and mixed it in with the shellac and let it set up for a little bit and let that color add to it. Again, adding the shellac, added the color to it, and then sanding it away and adding some more and sanding it away until I got the color to match pretty close. It doesn't have to be an exact match because from a few steps away it doesn't show. Then I just sealed the whole thing with some clear shellac, and it will dry a little bit lighter than that color. So we have the little splines to hold it together. So some patches for the hinges, and then the spline across the crack, it says family. I did engrave that with a CO2 laser. And it's all ready to be matched up to the chest itself. Thanks for stopping by.